Hi, in this beginner's knitting machine video, I'm going to be showing you how you can make this really fantastic baby sleeping blanket. It's got these beautiful button-up edges, which you can see can just be undone. It's very, very soft and luxurious on the outside, beautiful against the baby's skin. Inside, really, really, really soft and scrumptious. And we've got this little hood here as well, which looks like it's knitted all in one, but we use a secret seaming technique to do that. This is a beginner's project. This is going to be knitted, as you'll see in the video, in less than 40 minutes. I'll then show you afterwards how to do the seaming and put it together. So I hope you enjoy. Hi, so I'm making this really basic beginner's video for machine knitting for my friend Irene Schreiber, who is considering whether or not she needs to get a knitting machine. She's a really great hand knitter, and she sent me a photograph of a lovely baby sleeping bag, which I thought if I replicate it on the knitting machine for Irene, obviously you could benefit too. You'll see exactly how quick it is to use a knitting machine. So I'm more or less set up. I have chosen my yarn. This is like a fluffy type of multicoloured yarn. And I'm going to use this for the edges because I think it'll look really cute on a baby's sleeping bag. I haven't chosen the buttons that I'm going to use yet. We'll choose those later on. But I'm just going to quickly run through what the pattern was. I've made some little notes. My friend Irene said that she casted on 69 stitches on a knitting needle and then she began the pattern. And using this wool or yarn, because it's a little bit chunkier, we're only going to cast on 40 stitches. But before we begin, because using a knitting machine uses up the wool or the yarn so quickly, we need to transform this into one of these. And this is called a cake. And you can see that what we do is the wool just pulls out from the middle. So I'm going to quickly show you how that's done. Okay, so we're just going to take the ball of yarn and we're going to pop it here next to this wool winder. Okay, you can get these on eBay for about £5 or £6 and you're going to see how easy they are to use. You just thread the end of your yarn through the little eyelet, and there's some little grooves here on top of this, and then all you need to do is just turn the handle, and as you can see it's wrapping the yarn into a new corn, and it's very, very quickly. So I'll finish winding this and then we'll come back. Okay, so I think that's about it. We've come to the end of the wool, so I'm just going to wrap this wool around and tuck it inside. And at the top here you can see where we put our wool before, we've got our centre pull, so we can just lift this cake off and we can bring it back over, ready for use on the machine. So as you can see, I'm just going to move this, we've turned these into these. It only takes a few minutes, but the advantage is the wool pulls all the way from the centre. So before we begin, I'm just going to show you the basic principles of how the knitting machine works. So here we've got some hand knitting, which everyone's familiar with if you've ever seen any knitting done. And what happens is all of the stitches are held on a needle and the knitter will place one needle through and knit off one stitch and drop the stitch off the end, and then decide what to do with the next one. Knit off the stitch, and so on and so on. The difference with a knitting machine is that all of these stitches, rather than being held on one needle, are actually held on their own needles. So can you see there? These 3 stitches would be held on 1, 2, 3 needles. And what we do is we decide what's going to happen with each stitch before we move the carriage across. And when we take the carriage across, all it does is moves the needle out and in, just like I did with my hand knitting, and places yarn into the needle and pulls it back and drops the stitch. So that's what makes it so very fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin. Now before we begin knitting, I am going to tell you that once we're set up, I'm going to put the timer on. Rather than use this timer, which will drive me insane, I'm going to use the timer on the microwave, and we'll set that when we're ready to begin so you can follow how quickly the knitting goes. But before we begin, we're going to have to cast on, okay? So casting on in knitting, we'll use this pink yarn that we used before. It's really easy, okay? We always cast on with what we call waste yarns. That's a yarn that's a completely different colour to the colour you're going to knit in, and it helps you see the stitches easily when you pick up the hem. So all we're going to do is we're going to pass the yarn up through the hole, around the tension dial, like so, in through the next hole, and then we bring down the rabbit's ear, and this is what keeps the yarn nice and tense, and we place it in. So now we're ready to knit. So I know for this pattern I need to cast on 40 stitches, and to do that I simply come to the front of the needle bed, and you can see that each of the needles are numbered in groups of 5, 10, 15, 20 to the left, and the same to the right. So the middle is 0, and it increases on the right and increases on the left. So to make 40 stitches I need 20 on each side. So I start at number 20, and I bring out needle number 20, number 19, number 18, etc. and so on. Because all of the needles that are at the back of the bed won't do a thing. If we bring them forward, they'll knit for us. We can do that by hand, or they provide these very, very, very good rulers which do the job for you. It's all about speed. So we're just going to continue here. If you push out too many needles, for instance here I've pushed out 23, you can just push them back before you begin. So now we've got 40 needles ready to knit on. Now just before we do our cast on, only for the cast on, we're just going to take back every other needle, because we only need the even numbered needles to do the cast on. You'll see why in just a sec. So now I've done that, I've got every other needle. I'm just going to slide my carriage across to make sure all the needles are in line, and then I place my yarn inside the carriage and I slide across the needles. So as you can see, the needles have been caught with the yarn, and we've got these little loops. So we've now begun our first line of knitting. Now when you hand knit, I'm just going to quickly show you again, you're constantly having to tug the knitting down in order to get to the stitches. Machine knitting is too quick to do that, so they all provide you with some weights that go on the bottom of your knitting called a cast on comb, and all you do is hang your loops through your cast on comb and secure the yarn. Once you've done that, you're ready to begin knitting. So we'll bring back out those in between needles that we pushed back before. So we've got 40 needles in total to work on. That's it. So from number 20 all the way to number 20, we're going to put a little bit more weight. These come with your machine too, into these little slots, and then we're ready to begin knitting. So we simply to the right, to the left, and as you can see, we're now knitting. So I'm just going to knit a few rows of this, and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so I finished knitting a few rows with what we call the waste yarn. The reason we use waste yarn is because these weights are really quite heavy and we don't want them to pull on our very, very delicate baby wool. So we knit with these first just so the weight has something to go on to, but we're now ready to start knitting the project. So I'm going to start the timer, okay, and we're going to see how much we can get done in 1 hour. So 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. And our timer is beginning. So I know that for the front, which I'm going to start first, I need to do 9 rows of knitting to make a hem. And then what we'll do is we'll fold the hem over and sew it to itself before we begin the main part. So for the hem, we're using this really fluffy yarn. Okay. And we just hold the yarn. That's one row, and you can see that the row counter keeps check for us so that we don't have to worry about anything. I'm just going to lift that up and out of the way. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's the hem done. It's finished. So all we want to do is we want to fold it back up on itself, which I'm going to come back to and show you how to do that in a sec. We're now at 58 minutes and 50 seconds. Okay, so all I've done is I've taken the weight off the bottom of the knitting and I've placed it up here on the table, and that's so that I can fold my hem and I can use what's called a sew as you go technique. You could, if you wanted to, continue knitting and sew this by hand at the end, but I have to admit I don't like to sew by hand. So you get one of these tools with your machine, and all it's for, I'll show you, is so you can pick up hems at the bottom of your knitting and lift them up and fold them and hang them onto the stitches, and that's all it's for. So then you literally come along, pick up your next stitch at the bottom of your hem, pop it onto the needle. So I'm just going to go all the way along here and I'm going to pick up each stitch and hang it on. It shouldn't take me too long. Okay, so I'm nearly finished. You can find sometimes you can turn it over and you've got 2 prongs, and you can simply just pop them in like that and pop them onto the needle. Now, something that you'll always find with a hem is you'll have 1 less stitch to hang than you did before, and that's just the way that hems work. All we need to do now is put our weight back on, and now you'll see why we use waste yarn, because we obviously wouldn't want to put these prongs into our lovely knitting. So I'm just going to move this out of the way. We're just going to pop our weight back on. We don't care if we destroy this piece of the knitting because it's waste. It's going to be cut off at the end. And we'll pop our weights back on because we've now finished our hem. We've hung the hem. It saved me a bit of time sewing up later on. Going to make sure we put our yarn back into the carriage. If it's a little bit loose, you just pull behind until the rabbit ear comes down again. Okay, just going to make sure that we pull that down. I'm just going to knit 1 row to seal that hem. And that's the hem done. Can we just have a little time check, by the way? We're now at 53 minutes, 35 seconds left. And we're going to get straight on to the knitting. So the main front part I have written down is 72 rows of knitting. So we're going to just leave that like that. Place the row counter back to 0 so it makes it easy to count. We're going to take our yarn that we're going to use for the front. We're going to place it into the carriage just like before. Hold the 2 pieces of wool or yarn, slide across, that's 1 row, that's 2, that's 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to do this 72 times and I'll be back. Okay, 69, 70, 71, 72. So we've now knitted the front of our baby sleeping blanket. We can see the time. We've still got 50 minutes and 48 seconds left of our hour that I gave myself to knit this piece. I know that the back is 112 rows, but so I remember where to fold this. All I'm going to do is take a piece of yarn, 2 actually, okay, and I'm going to place them just here in between the sides, and all this is for is just to mark where the bottom will be. So I'm just going to pull it through there, like so, and like so. And I'll do the same at the other side, so when we fold it, we know where the fold line is before I continue. So I'm just going to come through, pull some yarn through, and I'll take these out when the project's finished. So now I've got to get on with the front, which I know is 112 rows, so I simply set my row counter back to 0. And I'll see you in 112 rows time. And one more row. Oh, we just had enough yarn for that, thankfully. I did have to change to a new yarn. You can see I've only got one left now. But we've done 112 rows, so now we've finished the front as well. And if we have a time check, we've been knitting for 15 minutes. So later on, we're going to sew this together into a little triangle hood. So rather than cast it off when I'm going to sew it together anyway, I'm just going to do what we call taking that off onto waste yarn. Okay. Now, just a little point by the way, this weight that I said it can sort of ruin your knitting at the beginning, once it hits the floor you will have to move it up, or you can just pop the actual small weights themselves into the knitting. The teeth aren't very big, so they aren't going to spoil the yarn too much. So I'm just going to take the waste yarn that we used before, could be any old yarn. I'm just going to make sure we threaded that through. I'm going to pop that in, and we're just going to knit a few rows of this. And we'll take this off at the end of the project. Okay, I'm happy with that, and all I'm going to do is cut the yarn. I'm going to remove the weight from the yarn, and to take it off the machine, you just make sure there's no yarn in the carriage, and we've now nearly got one finished baby cocoon. So you can see where my little threads were before, where we put the yarn markers, is where it's going to fold up into the sleeping bag. We can see that here is the nice fluffy hem that we decided to sew as we go. We'll take all this off when the project's ended. All we have left to do is to, I just pop that there, knit some side hems which are going to go up and down there, and then sew this together into a little hood. And we are less than 20 minutes into the project. So let me show you how you do the side hems. I'll be back in just a sec. Okay, so I'm back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put the side hems on. From the back, there are going to be buttons sewn on which go through the front. So we'll do the back first because we haven't got to worry about any buttonholes. So to find the back, all you need to do is find your yarn marker that you placed on before, go all the way along to the edge, and it's the end with waste yarn, not the end with the lovely fluffy hem. That's the front. So to find the back, you find the edge that hasn't got the nice fluffy hem. From the marker to the end of the work, just hold it up roughly against your machine so you can see how many needles you'll need to knit on. I've already brought my needles forward because I did this before I started filming, and you can see that I'm going from needle 42 on the left all the way over to needle 42 on the right. But you just hold it up and that's all you need to do. Now, to hang the work, you take one of the transfer tools as I showed you before, and we're going to move in quite closely here. You just place it through the edge of your stitch and hang the work. I'm trying to do this left-handed so that you can see, onto the hook. Okay, I'll do that again for you. So place the needle through the work and hang it onto a hook. Okay. Now at this point, I usually go to the other end to save the work going on the floor, and I find where that yarn marker is, and I hang the end stitch onto a needle, and then the next end stitch onto a needle. Find the middle, unroll it, pop a stitch on through the needle and the next stitch, and then it's very, very easy to hang the rest of them. We'll just give that a little, that's it. To hang the rest of them, you can use your 2-prong or even your 3-prong tool, and you can just go along roughly wherever you can find space, pop your 3-prong tool straight through the edge of your knitting and hang the work, and that's all you need to do. All the way along, just keep moving to the middle of the work, pop your 3-prong tool through and hang it on the needles just above it. So I'm going to go all the way along the bed, hanging each of these stitches, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I'm just literally getting to the end of my row, hanging my last couple of stitches, ready to knit the hem. That's it. Now something I always do is I pull down on my knitting and I bring all of the needles right the way out, and that way I can check that everything is hung on a needle. Just give it a little tug. If anything comes away, it means that you haven't hung the stitch, and you would simply go back in and hang the stitch. So now we're ready to knit the hem. We have 37 minutes and 52 seconds left of our hour. Okay, so we just take the yarn. Remember before it was 9 rows, so I've reset the row counter to 0. I'm just going to pop my little weights on the edges just to keep those stitches down. Oops. Just like so. That's it. Gonna bring my carriage back, pop my yarn through the hole, and we're going to knit 9 rows. This first row might be a little bit difficult, but that's okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now at this point we could do what we did before, which was we could lift this up and we could rehang each one and then sew it in. But to be honest, I want the hem to be a little bit loose, so I am going to hand sew that later on. So all I'm going to do is cut the yarn, because I won't use this yarn to sew it with, it's a bit too fluffy. And we will take that off on waste yarn just like before. So we'll knit a few rows of this, which we'll unravel when the knitting's finished. Do a good 7 or 8 rows. We've just got a little bit, that's it. A couple of more rows. And I think that will do. So just like before, I'll cut the yarn, place the yarn back into the feeder, take off my weight, just like so. And I'll take the carriage across empty to remove the work. And now, if you just come in a little bit closer, you'll see that we've got our nice fluffy side hem. And when we fold it over, we'll use the waste yarn and we'll sew through each of these loops, which I'll show you later on. But basically, we've now finished the side hem. So you're going to repeat the same on the other side of the back. Remember, we're going from the side that hasn't got the fluffy hem all the way to the edge of the yarn marker. We'll use the same needles, that's needle 42 to 42, and we'll do the second hem and then we'll be back. And we have 34 minutes and 46 seconds remaining to knit. Okay, so I've just finished that second hem across the back. As you can see, that's all ready now to be sewn up. So now we're going to do the front. You do the front hem in exactly the same way, but the front is shorter than the back. So you don't need to hang on as many needles. So I've held up, when you do the front, include your top piece of hem. I found that on my machine that needle 25 to needle 25 was enough, and I brought those needles out ready. So I'm going to do as I did before, and I'm going to hang these stitches onto the side, but I don't want you to start the hem without watching the next part, okay? And we're now on 25 minutes and 54 seconds remaining. See you in a sec. Okay, so I've just finished my third row of the front hem, and the reason that I wanted you to stop before you go any further when you've knitted your first 3 rows is that we need to put 4 buttonholes into the hem. So I'm going to show you how you make your buttonholes, okay? Very quickly, by the way, you know we were working on 50 stitches, so I'm going to show you how I work out where to put my buttonholes. My first buttonhole is going to be 3 stitches in, so 25, 24, 23. And this is to give us room when the button's there, that it's got room. And we'll do the same on the other side. Needle 25, 24, 23. So they're in exactly the same place. Now, that leaves us with 44 needles, because we're going to take off these 3 and these 3 from the 50. So it leaves us with 44 needles that we can put onto, we can use for our other buttonholes. So if we divide that into 3 pieces, that means we need a buttonhole every 14 holes. So we need a buttonhole at number 23, at number 8, 10, 9, 8, so I'll bring that out. Number 8 on the other side, 10, 9, 8, and this one here. So these, where the needles are out, are going to be where we put our buttonholes, and I'm going to show you how to make a buttonhole now. So you pick up your transfer tool, and if you just come in and have a little look, I'll show you what we're going to do. You simply pick up where you want your hole to be. Once the stitch is on, you pop it onto the next needle, and that leaves you with a hole for your buttonhole. So you just do that all the way along. Okay, so we're just going to pop in, lift up, move over. That's our second buttonhole done, and we've got 2 more buttonholes to do. So lift up and over, and the final one, lift up and over. Now remember, this is a hem, so it's going to be folded, so we'll need to make these buttonholes again for the folded side, and I'll show you how to do that. Now that we've got the buttonholes in, we want to make sure the needles are ready for the carriage. We'll do 3 more rows. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll bring out those same needles again so that the buttonholes on this side are in exactly the same position. 10, 9, 8, 10, 9, 8, and 25, 24, 3 in from the edge. We'll do the buttonholes again. So when we fold it over, we've obviously got a buttonhole that goes all the way through. Third buttonhole. If it gets a little bit fidgety, just bring the needle all the way back out and lift off. And our final buttonhole. And we'll make our hole there. We'll just quickly make sure that those needles are ready again. And we want to knit 3 more rows to finish the hem. So that's 1, 2, 3. So now we've got 9 rows, just like before. And you can see here, we have our buttonholes. So when we fold this over, the buttonholes match. And we're going to sew this down by hand at the end. So once again, I'll just leave that up and out of the way for a sec because I won't be using it. So we'll take our waste yarn and we'll knit a few rows in waste yarn. And then, just like before, we'll remove the work from the machine and we'll do the other side in exactly the same manner. So I'll get on with the other side. You can too. Remember, knit 3 rows, put your 4 buttonholes in, knit 3 more rows, put the buttonholes in again, and then knit another 3 rows. So you're knitting 9 rows in total with 2 rows of buttonholes at row 3 and at row 6. So I'll do the other side and I'll come back. Okay, so welcome back. I am just now, I've finished my second front hem. I'm just taking it off onto waste yarn. And just like before, I made 2 buttonholes 4 times in the work, one above the other, and I'll show you what to do with them shortly. But for now, I just want you to take it off on waste yarn. One extra row for luck. Okay, we'll pop that there. Take the weight off the work and remove it. And we've now finished all of the knitting. Well done. And we'll just get a time check. From our original hour, we still have 18 minutes and 37 seconds remaining. So, because you've finished your knitting, you can put the knitting machine away if you like. I'm just going to pop that over there for a sec. I'm going to push my needles away and I'm going to show you how you seam this together. So, you'll have some sides with waste yarn on like this, and this is the back. Okay, so you place that like so. We're going to fold in the hems like so, and we're going to just sew. You could do this with a machine or by hand. I'm going to show you how we do it by hand shortly. You just sew down each of these little white stitches to the work, and what that will do is it will create this lovely fluffy hem. Okay, and then you do the same on the other side. And then what we do to make the hood is we bring these stitches and these stitches together and we sew those together, and then we sew this together, and then finally we just lift up the front and sew these down and pop our buttons on. But we did finish our knitting in 40 minutes. You'll probably find it takes you longer to sew the buttons on and to seam it together, but we'll start that now. Okay, welcome back. So, what I've done is I have sewn down the first 3 hems. So I've sewn down the 2 back hems and I've sewn down the first of the front hems. And as you can see, with the front hem, we've got our little buttonholes because we matched them up earlier. Okay, so these are our little buttonholes and this is the front. So basically, we've got 1 hem left to seam. Now, I don't think that my friend Irene will leave me to teach her how to seam up a hem. But for any of you out there who are beginners, like I was up until last year, I'm going to show you how you're going to sew down these hems. And I'm also going to show you how we're going to sew these 2 halves together to form the hood, but in a special way so that the seam can't be seen and it will look like the knitting. So we're going to start with this hem first, and I'll also tell you when we've done this how you get rid of this excess pink piece. Okay, so in order to do the hems, if we use this white fluffy yarn that we use to do the actual knitting with, it will just shred. So choose a colour that's the same, okay, and you want to take a thinner strand of the same colour, about 2.5 times the length of the hem, so that will be fine. And I'm going to quickly show you how to thread up your needle. Okay. The easiest way to thread up the needle is you'll use tapestry needle. Tapestry needle has a blunt end so you can't hurt yourself. You fold the yarn over, slide the needle out, and then pop the yarn through like so. So, in order to sew down the hem, if you look very, very closely, we've got the waste yarn and then we've got the knitting, and in between we've got a line that looks like one strand of the white wool. In actual fact, what it is, if we look closely between the two pink stitches, there's a stitch. Then between the next two pink stitches, there's a stitch, and this is what we're going to be picking up all the way along and folding over the hem. So in order to begin, we're going to find the first stitch, which is just here. The first one's always a little bit tricky, but we could see it just here between the first two stitches, and we pick that up on the edge of the needle. We fold the hem over and we pull the wool or the yarn through. Leave a little bit of a long tail. I'll show you how we're going to use that later. When you've done the first stitch, you come along by one bump of the waste yarn and find the next stitch. Now this is why it helps if your waste yarn is a completely different colour to the colour that you knitted with, because it helps you to see the stitches when it comes to sewing up the work. So we're just going to do a couple of more stitches so you can see what it is that we're doing. So you just pull just loosely, and here we go again. So we count, if you can see this, one pink stitch in my case along, go under the white stitch with the needle and in and back out to fold it over, and then pull the yarn. I know this is white on white, it's not ideal, but that's the colours that we've chosen. Now I just want to give you a quick tip. Because this is the front hem, we have our buttonholes that we made earlier. So to make sure that the two buttonholes are aligned, you can just pop your finger through while you continue to pick up a stitch very carefully between the two pink stitches. Oh, we've lost it. We'll just pick it up again between the two pink stitches and then back. And I'm just going to do a couple more to show you what you do when you manage to get to the knitted part. So I've still got my finger in the buttonhole to keep it aligned. I come along by one pink bump. I come underneath to pick up the first stitch. And then when I come back here, at the edge of the knitting where the hem joins, it feels like a bump. We're coming underneath the bump and straight back out like so. And we're going to lift up the yarn. I'm going to pop my finger back through the buttonhole and just gently pull on the yarn so it comes together, and you'll see it almost looks as if you're knitting your waste yarn up to the edge of the garment. So one more time. When we've done a stitch, we come along past the first pink stitch, up underneath, catch our first white stitch. We come along to the bump in the knitting where the knitting joins and pop our needle in and underneath that first stitch, and then we can just pull very, very gently. So what I'm going to do So I'm just going to tighten that. I'm going to go along the rest of these stitches and I'm going to join them onto the edge like so. So by the time I'm done, I'll have all of this folded over and sewn on, and then I'll show you what to do with this part of the knitting. So I'll be back soon. Okie dokie, so we're just doing our last few stitches in underneath. We've got another stitch here, so we want to make sure it's in and underneath. And we'll just check to see, yeah, there's generally always one more just hiding. And there it is. Okay, so we're going to pop that underneath and in, like so. Now, when you've done your last stitch, you might be wondering, so what do I do now with all of these bits? So I'm going to show you what I do. I go back in through the stitch I've just made, and I lift it up and I tie it in a loose knot by passing it back under the last loop and then just pulling tightly. And then I shall show you in a second what we do with these parts here. But for now, I want to show you that when you've done that, okay, and you can see where our buttonholes are. There's a buttonhole. There's a buttonhole. Okay, so everything's looking okay. Give it a little check over. Make sure everything's okay. Then you can take this long piece of yarn, which is attached to this, and you can just unravel it. So you can use this again if you want to, but it is called waste yarn for a reason. It's because it's left over at the end, and its only job is either to hold stitches. If it gets a little bit tangly like that, just give it a gentle pull. And you can see here there's a couple of small strands that I've caught in with my sewing. So I'm just going to give those pink strands a little snip and continue pulling out the waste yarn. Again, if we get any areas like this, especially with yarns which are very, very hairy or rough, like the one we've been using, you sometimes will find that you get caught. So you can just give the yarn a little snip, and you just want to go along and pull out all of your waste yarn. Again, I've caught it a little bit there. You can see those pieces. So I just give them a little snip. That's it. And you can see here now, we're just pulling through. Just here, I seem to have caught myself, so I'm going to cut. Never cut your knitting, of course. You just want to cut the waste yarn. And I'm going to pull that back through. And you can see now we've got our last lot of loops of the waste yarn, and as we just pull, they just come straight out of the knitting, like so. And you just keep pulling, and that removes all of the waste yarn. And you can see that what you've ended up with on the right side of the knitting is a beautifully sewn hem. Now remember earlier when we were knitting, we we placed a little marker so that we knew where the turn was going to be. Well, we no longer need that, so we can just, if I can just get in there, unpick and pull out the marker. Now I told you what I would do with these odds and ends before. When this knitting is actually being used, it's going to be folded up like this, and we're going to sew 4 buttons onto here, which will come through there. Okay, so these pieces here aren't really needed. So what I will do is I'm just going to go along this edge Again, I'm going to thread up my needle. And I'm just going to go along the edge just to join the two pieces together. That should be the two halves, to be honest, rather than the two pieces. Okay. And once we've done that, I'm going to make one more knot, like so. And then here is the magic part. You just pop your needle in and out a few times of some of your stitches to catch hold of the yarn, like so. So it's almost like you're weaving in and out. Pull that thread in, and then you push the needle inside the hem. Remember, the hem is like a tube, and you push the needle quite far up and out, like so. And then if you give it a little tug and you cut the end, when you pull, oh, it disappears. So I'm going to do the same thing with this piece of yarn here, and then I'm going to come back and show you the final part, which is the magic invisible seam to make the hood. See you in a sec. Okay, so I'm just checking that. I've just finished hiding all the ends in that final hem, and I think you can see that looks good. So imagine we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons, which can be buttoned up through the little buttonholes that we made. Okay, so they'll be buttoned all the way up there, and then this is going to be a hood which comes down and over the baby with the fur trim. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the final part of the seaming, and that is the hood. And I want to show you a special way to do that. So if you turn your work over, okay, and bring the work up, so it's almost like you're making the hood on the wrong side. And I'm going to show you a technique that I learned from someone on YouTube called Diana Sullivan. She's from Austin, Texas. She calls this technique the Kitchener stitch, and she presents it beautifully. I'm going to quickly demo it now. If you want to see it done with meticulousness, I suggest that you go and watch her videos, but I will quickly demonstrate it now. The point in this is that this, when it's done, looks like it was knitted all at once on the hood. Okay, so a little tip for you. These needles are very easy to lose on dark floors and dark surfaces. I always keep one cake of wool just to put my needles into. So I've got a really long piece of the yarn that we knitted the garment in that I just happened to have, because when we knitted the garment I held down the yarn before we went across, and it's about the right length. If yours is shorter, you need it to be around about 3 times the length of the seam, which is this, of your hood. If you don't have that, you can just cut a new piece of yarn from your leftovers. So we're just going to thread this up, just like before, okay? And then what we're going to do is hold this out of the way, and we're going to fold the work over so that the knit side that we'll use as the hood is inside and it's facing each other. Okay, you see these rows of bumps that we have, just like before, where we have the waste yarn and a stitch. This is what we're going to be using. So we want to take our yarn through the first stitch, which is here. Just going to pop it through there, and then we're going to meet up with the first stitch on the other side, which is here. Okay, and we're just going to pull those first 2 stitches together. Now I appreciate this might be a little bit difficult to see, but you can see there what we've done. Now we go through the next stitch and we go back to the stitch that we first came out of, like so. And then we pull this in. And you repeat this all the way up the seam. And the way that Diana Sullivan describes it is this, which I really like. To get through the next stitch, it's in through the neighbour and then back across the street, i.e. back into the stitch that you came out of, and you just pull, and then in through the neighbour and back across the street. So back to the stitch that you came out of. You always go back into the stitch you came out of and you go in through a new stitch. So in through the neighbour, and just one sec, I'm going to make sure that we go through the correct stitch, yep, and back across the street. So I'm just going to continue all the way up and I'll see you when I get to the end. Okay, so we're almost coming to the end now. I'm just going to do these final few stitches and then show you what to do. So in through the neighbour, back across the street. You should be able to see that it looks exactly like the knitting on this side. That's it. Make sure you pick up all of the stitches in through the neighbour, back across the street, in through the neighbour, back across the street, and then just here I've got, can you see, 2 more stitches to do. In through the neighbour, back across the street, in through the neighbour, and back across the street. Okay, so when that's done, you'll want to weave in the ends. Okay, so in order to weave in the end, you just want to pick up a stitch like so, something that's not really being used, and just maybe go through, go through 3 or 4 of the loops. And then cut the end off, and then remember, unless your baby's going to look like they've got a Mohican, you want to take off the waste yarn from here too. Now it's all one piece folded, so let's see what our result is. That's it. If we hit a snag like we did before, we'll take the same care that we did before to ensure that we're not pulling or cutting our knitting yarn. So again, just here. Now this tends to happen with snaggy yarns, as I call them. That's okay. It's called waste yarn for a reason. So just here I can see a couple of threads from this yarn are pulling. So I'm just giving that a little snip. Here again I can feel there's a pull. When I look closely, there's a couple of little threads that I've managed to sew in to my knitted yarn. Now look what's happening here. As we pull the waste yarn away, I'm just going to give that a little snip there. And we can continue pulling the waste yarn. Now again, just feel a little snag, so we're just going to take a little bit of care on this last piece. That's it. If we go underneath, you can find that the yarn is just caught here. As I say, don't rush this last part because this seam is going to be on view at all times. So it is worth taking an extra minute or so to ensure that you've done it correctly. And I've got a little piece of waste yarn there. I'm just going to pull that through there. That's it. And what we should have, hopefully, is a seam that looks invisible and as if it were knitted all in one. The seam is flat on both sides, so it's going to be really, really comfortable for the baby's head. There's nothing there, okay? All we have to do now is to use this little piece of white yarn here to do the same thing here to sew that up, and then pop the buttons on. And as soon as we've done that, we're ready to give our gift to somebody. So I'll see you when we've popped the buttons on. Okay, so I've sewn on the buttons, which I think we're just about done. As you can see, I just chose a sort of a mother of pearl effect. Basically it's the one I had 8 matching of, but it does look quite nice. So I'm going to show you how to basically do it up. So you'll fold up to where your gap is, and then you simply pop through the buttonhole on each side, like so. You would do that all the way up, and then of course on the other side through the buttonholes. Let's just check we've got our buttonholes. So we do that all the way up, and then that seam I think came out really, really well. You wouldn't be able to tell that that knitting wasn't just a continuation, and inside as well you can see there's no thick heavy seam, and I think that that is going to make a pretty nice gift for a new mum-to-be, or even for someone who values their small dog or cat and they want to use it as a bed. Now bear in mind that this took just less than 40 minutes to knit. However, it has taken hours of time to do the seaming. So you might want to use a sewing machine if you don't like to seam by hand, or you can do more of your seaming on the actual knitting machine, like we did at the beginning, but that would be for a different tutorial. The fact that it only took 40 minutes to do all of the knitting, including the actual hems, etc., I think is pretty impressive. It's a nice, soft, fluffy, finished baby sleeping bag, and I think that anyone would be pleased to receive it. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and let me know in the comments or whatever they do if you've got any questions, and let me know about any of your own work. Thanks very much for watching, and Irene, I hope you buy your knitting machine now.